life problems that people actually have in this life, in their daily routines, especially if they're trying to keep up in the economy and they're trying to make good with their family. Now, I can tell you, while none of this stuff is really, it's not gender specific in terms of it doesn't exclude women, it's almost all aimed at men. Right? The images are almost all of men, and the assumption here is men are the breadwinners. So it's men who need to possess these qualities. Again, it doesn't formally exclude them, right? But you can tell by the nature of the readings themselves that they're assuming a kind of backdrop here. So, it's very heavily influenced by psychology. I mean, really heavily influenced. In fact, in some cases, some people start with a kind of psychological quiz, or they will actually start with some pretty deep psychology. But one of the things I find fascinating is that there's often an assumption that every modern person knows a little bit about the fact that we all have an ego and a psyche, and then they'll go from there. Or that we all have an inner self, right? And I mean that in terms of a psychological inner self, not a spiritual inner self, right? So they will use that kind of language. It's all inward-looking, self-exploration, self-discovery. Again, working on the self. And it takes work. You have to, you're not born this way, you have to become this way. And you have to realize that you self, and of course the first recognition, guess what? You need this. And that you recognize that you need it is because you have bought a book, bought a self-help book. And there's a lot of Western sources. I mean, I can tell you this, there's a ton of these things that are coming, and I should apologize as a Westerner for having been part of a society and culture that produced this stuff. It still does. Again, I'm not judging, but I am judging. I find this stuff over the top. I really do. I find it a bit obnoxious that someone out there who doesn't know me is claiming to know me. And again, it's not that I don't have my own inadequacies, but it's really kind of, and it's so overly simplistic, and it's geared to everyone. It's like everyone is in the same situation. But of course, that's the whole point. It's like reading, which I know no one here does, it's like reading your astrological chart, right? It's so generic and general that anyone can find some kind of meaning in those things, right? And that's what this is too, in some ways, right? A lot of Western sources, and again, some of it is cut and pasted, but there's a lot of name dropping and individuals, again, especially of people who have made good financial success in their lives. Because that's what people are looking for, is they serve as a model. This is what they did, this is what you did. Right? And by the way, the storyline, because there's a lot of stories in these things, they just repeat story after story. The best stories are those of failure that then lead to success. Because that'll make all of us failures out there feel better about ourselves. Because everybody fails, so that means you just pick yourself up and you do it again, and guess what? If you use these nice coded things, you can do the same thing, okay? So a couple of people who have done work on this basically say that a lot of people like Ibrahim Fiqi, who again is a hotel manager by profession and a metaphysicist by, I guess you could say, by his doctorate degree. But again, the University of Metaphysics in Los Angeles is not a place that you would get a degree from and then apply to a university. This is one of these kind of, degree producing places that you can buy a degree online. Right? But the point is, he wanted to be able to put the doctorate here, but he is really simply taking stuff that's already out there and he's making it more popular. He's making it, and he's a good public speaker. So what he's doing is he's making it understandable to the common person in the street. And these books are so simple and easy to read and easy to understand for the most part. They're written to a person who has a very low educational level in some cases, right? And they're geared to people who want to read these things. And it's intentionally done this way. So he's essentially a cultural translator. He's translating the culture of psychology, and he's also translating the culture of self-help that's been developed elsewhere. And he's translating it into a new environment. And part of the way he does that is of course, drawing on Islam. Some of his books There's barely any mention of Muhammad. Others, it's replete with references to the Quran and Sunnah, right? I mean, it's all over the place. And of course, he can pick his audience where he needs to give these talks. If he's giving it in the Gulf, there's a lot of God talk. If you're giving these talks elsewhere, not so much. Right? And in the translations, it's wonderful. I didn't even notice this until I was exploring both the French version and the English version and the Arabic version of the 10 Keys to Success. But in the English version, what I found very, very odd was midway through, again, he's telling anecdotal stories, he starts making reference to Seinfeld. Now, I don't know if any of you have seen Seinfeld or not, but he was making reference to George. Now, Seinfeld is essentially a Jewish comedy team, right? This stuff wouldn't go over well in the Arabic-speaking world, right? And guess what? That story was essentially, he took stories that were in his Arabic version, he took them out, and he reinserted other stories that would make more sense to a Western audience in English, that they would resonate with. Again, it didn't matter to him, because there's not really any, this is all process, right? And the stories are just there to draw people in and draw them along, and it doesn't matter. He could pull out Muhammad or put Muhammad in, it doesn't matter. He's interchangeable with what? With other individuals who can serve as models. Okay, so, I mean, again, a lot of the literature of the Quran and the Sunnah can be geared to some kind of generic wisdom literature, along with quotes from Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Edison, Abraham Lincoln, you name it, right? They've got Madame Curie, they've got all kinds of people in here who, again, might resonate with people who know a little bit about modern history. And I'm using the phrase here, the way Islamic tradition often gets used in these texts as spray on Islam. That's a quote from, I don't know, some of you know, the sociologist Sami Zubaydah. His notion was that what you see a lot in a lot of modern books and a lot of modern discourse in many Muslim majority societies, especially in the Middle East, is some version of spray on Islam. In other words, whatever the topic, you got to spray a little bit of Islam. Why? Because it's a religious audience, at least that's the assumption, and they need a little bit of Islam, so you spray it on. It doesn't matter where it is, but you spray it on. Now it's a very cynical observation. I happen to think he's right. It is a version of spray on Islam that he has here. Excuse me. So, now I should say that some of these things are, the whole part of this notion is that most of us don't even know who we are. So some of the language is quite explicit in know yourself, be self-confident, how to build your personality and develop the self. It's not developed now, but it can be. Manufacturing the self, I love this, as if it isn't there, and it certainly isn't God-given, folks, right? You need to work on this. God is the next this, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about here and now. And then, of course, these dynamic little arrows. The first book about human development using new analytic thought. This ain't new. It's just crib scientific pseudopsychology that's put together to sell a book. One of my favorites is Sharif Arafah. Some of you, if you ever looked at this stuff, he's incredibly popular in Egypt right now. He probably has like 5 self-help books out there. He is a trained dentist. Okay? He's a dentist, for God's sake. Okay? That's what his dog means. So he's not, this is again, he's a human development somebody. He figured out the formula, and he just writes these books and pumps them out. And he has authority because he's a doctor. I mean, he has something to fall back on if the market falls out of self-help. He can always go back to dentistry. But still, it's just kind of odd. Now, one of the things I think that is associated with this is that the self, as it's being talked about, and you can see this on the bookshelves too, is expanded in terms of what the self is you need to work on. So there's a lot of stuff about health, diet, exercise, parenting, sex, and happiness. I mean, so the self is a full self, right? It's a full self in this life that if you want to be your fullest self, you need to get hold of your health, you need to lose weight, you need to exercise, you need to learn how to be a good parent, you need to have a better sex life, and doesn't everyone, and you need to be happy, right? And if you're not happy, well, forget it. You're not successful. But all of these things are being treated in kind of an array of an expanded notion of what is essentially a lifestyle of self-help. That is all part and parcel of this. So, and it's all very happy people. The rules of happiness, I didn't know there were rules, but there are rules. Reduce nutritional advice for your health problems, sex education for adolescents, and these two I just love. The sex life of women, problems and solutions, the 100 most important questions about sex, and then, you'll love this, the sex life of men, 250 of them. It's clear that male sexuality is far more complex than female sexuality. And if you didn't know that, I can loan you these books. And by the way, there are no pictures. There's no diagrams. This is all work. But it's amazing. It really is amazing stuff. So, my take on this is that the self that's being created overall in the genre, and I'm generalizing here, but overall in the genre, the kind of self that's being created here is not really a religious self, although religion is involved in it. It's a self that's autonomous. You're alone and you're on your own and you better get working on it, right? It's attuned with the inner self and its desires. You know yourself, you know what you need, you know how to get there. You are self-disciplined, you are self-regulated, and a personal fulfillment through choice. You are making choices with your life that are informed choices, and you're going to direct yourself. This is what one scholar in England who works on this stuff called an enterprising self. This is an enterprising self that's fully prepared to work in the modern workplace and in modern society and navigate it on their own without any assistance, and especially in a kind of neoliberal condition, without any help from the state. So as the state pulls back, as it has in many countries, and it started in the West, and now it's gone everywhere, where the state continues to pull back its assistance to its citizens, and in Egypt, this has become devastating. I can tell you, in the last decade, it's become really, really serious, as they've let the currency float, as they've propped up businesses, and they've forgotten not just the middle class, but the poor. It is really, really difficult here for many of these people. That neoliberal reality is hitting home when your government is answering more to the World Bank and the IMF than it is to its own citizens. You know there's a problem. But the point is, this literature is geared directly to that reality. And it's geared toward that because it's focused on the individual, yes? It's practical, it's all practical, and here's the selling point. I have never seen, by the way, a self-help book getting banned.
Yeah.
Self-help books are not banned, and they won't be, right? They won't be, because they're already fitting into the economics and the politics of these countries, including, by the way, the U.S., right? So they're fitting into the politics. Because it's neutral, they don't talk about countries. They don't talk about nationalism. They don't talk about political affiliation. They don't talk about ethnicity and culture. They don't talk about gender and sexuality as such. In other words, they're not out to make enemies. Yes, there are male and females. Okay, I will say, I have never seen a self-help for transgender people, but I imagine it's coming. Right. And they use, religion it's neutral in the sense that it typically supports all religion. It typically supports all belief. It typically supports prayer in general. Not because you're praying to anything real, and this is great about Dale Carnegie. He even has a little snippet in his one book that says, no matter what you believe, or even if you don't believe, get down on your knees, go into a quiet room, get down on your knees and pray, because it centers you, it blah, blah. In other words, it's almost like it's therapy, right? But the content of it doesn't matter whatsoever. Doesn't matter whatsoever. And then also class issues, which, by the way, the very idea of neoliberalism is is just filled with class issues and the problematic of class and the economics that goes along with that. But this stuff talks about none of this, because essentially what it's basically saying is if you do what we tell you to do, you can improve your class status. Right? I'm talking about socioeconomic class here. They don't deal with that at all. It's all about, again, this internal work on the self and how you can improve yourself. So, I think, okay, good, this is perfect. Okay, so I just want to transition to something else here, and that is end it with a couple of images from books that are in English. All of them are out of Saudi. Okay, another place that's pumping out this stuff too, and it's pumping out new versions of what I consider to be very new versions of self-help. It's not Islamic etiquette manuals, but it's a kind of new kind of self-help that is reflective of the popularity of the things I've been talking about. But it's trying to, put it this way, they're trying to get people to pay more attention to issues of piety, to otherworldliness, to belief, and some of those books are things like, and you can get these online, by the way, they're in Arabic and they're in English, they're in some other language. Also, some of you may have seen this. I'm going to mention a figure here who's been to Indonesia before, like Aidil Qarni, I think he's sitting here, yes. He's the gentleman who was shot at not that long ago. Right. Anyway, and by the way, if you didn't know that, this thing, Hassan, this thing has been so popular. It's incredibly popular. But if you read it, it's essentially a Dale Carnegie, Salafi theology version of self-help, right? It's turning towards God. You know, it has nothing to do with improving your status in this life, although he wants you to be happy. But you're only going to be happy if you realize that this life is only in preparation for the next. Okay, so it's kind of cut and dry in that sense. But it's very popular, and it's essentially a conservative version of this. But the titles are really kind of mimicking the kind of self-help titles. So be happy, but this is in case don't be sad, because it's negative positive kind of thing. By the way, for those of you who follow this guy at all, he just was one of the people who signed on to the current prince, and he denied his Islamist pass, and he asked for forgiveness for kind of promoting the Sahwa, the Islamic. He was one of those people who kind of came out and decided that that the prince kind of, has a better deal for him if he comes out and confesses that he kind of went down the wrong path. So anyway, and his other book, I love this, by the way. You can be the happiest woman in the world, right? A treasure chest of reminders. And by the way, if you don't, obviously this is the reminders here are how to be a good woman, how to be a good mother, how to be a good wife, kind of thing, kind of reminders. Again, it's a conservative message. By the way, if you're interested, this is free for downloading online, right? There's a bunch of his things that are free for download. If you need a PDF, I can direct you to it. Not that I'm advancing that you can be the happiest woman in the world. And then stop worrying and start living. Again, another conservative version. Taking the same kind of lines that you might find in modern self-help, but reworking them with a content that is far more conservative, and trying to remind Muslims that there is a Muslim self involved in this, and not just a self to live in this world. So, with that, I think I'll stop.
Give applause to the platform. Okay, so I think I could really use myself some help by helping myself to buy some of these self-help books, probably. But now let's help ourselves by bringing up some of your awesome questions. I will open up 3 questions from now, and please. Okay, first, please.
Thank you very much for your talk. My name is Ricardo. I am a PhD student at ICRS. I have 3 brief questions. The first one is related to Muslim Brotherhood type of literature that might resemble these type of literature. literature or that might challenge this view, if it is present on the publishing landscape in Egypt nowadays, if it's banned by the government, if it's allowed,
Right.
what is your experience being with this type of, if it exists, and what is it?
Well, it certainly did exist. In fact, when I was first learning Egypt in the mid-80s, and the etiquette manuals, it was almost all being produced by the Brotherhood related groups. You know, the Brotherhood had a number of publishing houses. So a lot of this stuff was. But there were a lot of other conservative or Islamist-related publishing houses too. And there still are some. But right now, it's not that you can't find conservative versions of an etiquette manual. It's almost like being a good Muslim. You can find those. But Muslim Brotherhood stuff, no one on the streets would put that stuff there. And the only stuff that you're going to find are kind of like sociological or historical studies that if you go in, like the life of Hassan al-Banna, that kind of thing, you can find those kinds of things on the streets, and you can find them in bookstores. But most of the stuff, and I can tell you because I've been following this, one of the books that I published was about the way in which Islamists, whether they're radical or not, were kind of anathematized, or Muslims were told that they were bad by being accused of being Qadis or Khawarij. You guys are familiar with that kind of terminology. That was huge in the 50s, 60s, 70s as the Muslim Brothers got big, and as there were some incidents that were occurring throughout Egypt. Said Qutb was accused in his trial of being one. It was all over the place. That stuff has been in the news from the 50s and 60s on in Egypt. Every time there's an incident, it's like it spikes. And there's a bunch of stuff gets produced by ulama or by public commentators or intellectuals who know the history, and they start to make accusations. That stuff stopped post-Arab Spring. None of that could be seen. And then 2013, when the incident happened in August with the square being cleared, and they wiped out all the Brotherhood people, and then they started arresting and they declared the group a terrorist group. Then, in that fall, from September, October, November, December, you wouldn't believe the number of anti-Muslim Brotherhood books that started to appear in the marketplace. Almost as if they were waiting in the wings, because you can't work up a book that quickly, right? So they were almost, and all of it was conspiratorial, talking about what the Brotherhood was doing and how bad an influence they were. And yet, a year before that, Egyptians had overwhelmingly elected a Muslim Brotherhood party in the first and only democratic election in Egypt. So I would just say that what's on the streets about the Brotherhood now is either unswervingly negative, and it's often more propagandistic than it is insightful, or it's just historical works that are talking about the rise of kind of thing, the rise of Islamism, or the rise of, because there's a lot of people who do political Islam in Egypt. There are a lot of journalists who work on it, and there are a lot of scholars who work on it. So doing that kind of work is one thing, but there's no one out there who's promoting the Brotherhood. And there are those kind of etiquette manuals that would be from the Brotherhood. Their publishing houses have all been closed down. In fact, they haven't just been closed down, but their property has been confiscated. They don't even have printing presses anymore. Now they have stuff abroad, and they do have online material, but most of that online stuff right now is geared towards kind of critiquing the Sisi and the government there. But can you find books? Yes. And by the way, all this stuff is now available on Amazon. It's all available on Amazon. Now, I haven't been to a lot of bookstores here in Georgia yet, but I know in Malaysia, you go to a fairly good name bookstore, and you can find all of this stuff on display. All of this kind of, the Saudi version of a self-help, you can find it all over the place. And I'm pretty sure, I don't know if the Lach Hasan, Don't Be Sad, that's been translated, hasn't it? It's been in Indonesian, I can't imagine it hasn't been. Very, very popular. I don't know if that.
Well, the second question would be regarding you mentioned in your talk that most of these books are published by a Saudi printing house, or some of them are being published by it. I'm wondering what about the Egyptian publishing houses that publish these type of books? Are they government owned? What is their agenda of the
Yeah,
Egyptian
I
publishing
might have
houses?
given the wrong impression here. The books that I find that are been translated the most from Saudi presses are actually Western sources written in English that are now being translated into Arabic. But in Egypt, there's a lot of publishing houses of various quality, levels of quality, that are pumping out this kind of thing. Because you can buy them for like 15 cents. They're very, very cheap. They're almost all paperback. And the ones that are most expensive are the ones that they have to pay copyright on. And they have to get the approval of the initial publisher in the US or in Britain or wherever. But the Saudi place, I mean, if you go online and look at Jarir bookstore, Jarir book publishing, and tons of stuff, and tons of stuff in English. Things, in some cases, things that you wouldn't think would be of interest to the Saudis to see published, but they're doing a lot of it. It does sell, right? And they're the most expensive book. But there's a lot of small printing houses in Egypt and that's where those books that are on the book stalls, the majority of them are coming from those places. So the guys on the street, they either represent a local Egyptian publisher, and they're only publishing works from that particular publisher, or they just move from publisher to publisher and they'll buy a handful of things, and over a series of months they'll try to sell it down. But no, there's a lot, and a lot of stuff on, again, self-help or self-improvement in terms of language learning, management, right? And a lot of stuff on love.
One last, there's this very famous televangelist in Egypt called Amir Khalid. I was expecting you at some point of your talk to talk about him, but mainly because he's just focused on media and more
Right.
effective media. But I'm wondering what's your inkling about him, because he really delves into Islam, he uses Islam
He does.
in order
He
to
does.
defend this type of neoliberal worldview.
Yeah, I think the only way he fits into the neoliberal part, I mean, I don't even know if that's fit. What he does, he fits into a middle class mold. He comes across, he's not one of the ulama, and of course his training, as you know, he's an accountant by training. Like many of these other human development people, his training has nothing to do with Islam. But yes, he does do a lot of religion. He's on television. He's been flown in by the Saudis and flown in by all the Gulf people to give talks. And he slathers it on pretty thick. The reason I didn't use him is that he's more live television or recording, and I'm looking at books and discourse in books. And he does have a few things, but not that much. Right? He does have a few things. But yes, he's part of the phenomenon of people who have made a lifestyle of going around, and I don't know if you've ever seen his programs, but it's like a talk show from the US, where he'll be sitting behind a thing, he's got a button-down shirt on, he's got a blazer, he looks like a person, he looks like an old, like a Jay Leno program or something like that, and then he has guests on and talks to, so it's very, very friendly to a kind of, I would say, a middle and upscale group of Egyptians who like that kind of talk. He doesn't wear a turban. He quotes from the same kind of material, but he uses it very differently, and he aims everything to practical problems that he knows fellow Egyptians have, as opposed to speaking in abstractions and speaking as if he's preaching at them, like you'll find many of the scholars do. He doesn't do that. He has a soft touch, and it is very therapeutic. Very, very popular. Very popular. By the way, it's not just popular there. Popular in the U.S. Now, he's not popular in the U.S. Nobody knows this guy. But I would say just about every country has a version of him, if not multiple. I do mention him in the article that I wrote briefly, as kind of a broader phenomenon.
Next question. Thank you. My name is Santa. It's quite surprising that I thought first it is about maybe the comparison between Egypt now and Egypt 10 years ago or so.
but your presentation is about literature, and I'm wondering how is it this research or this kind of phenomena, is it maybe there is a conspiracy, or maybe it's directed movement or someone behind them to reframe the society as like that, or in your opinion whether it's to maybe to reframe the consciousness of the society so that they will be more individualistic because there is always something. Or how is behind this shaping of the different kind of literature in your perspective?
Personally, I'm not a huge believer in conspiracies. I think sometimes things happen on their own, and I think what's happening in Egypt, just by the way, because it's happening everywhere, right? It's not just Egypt. Individualism is pushing people everywhere. And the push to become an individual who's successful, more knowledgeable, better in the world, all those kinds of things are being forced on us in some way by the fact that capitalism has taken over, right? Capitalism, global capitalism drives our lives, right? And the capitalist workplace drives our lives, whether we like it or not. And it certainly is driving the modern academy, the academic now too. So it is, and I thought I was going to be able to hide the rest of my career in university. It wasn't going to reach there, but over the past 5 or 6 years, it's slowly seeped in, and I'm going to wind up retiring, and I'm going to be very ready for retiring because all the management speak is just coming out of the woodwork now. So a lot of this stuff is, I don't think it's a conspiracy. I think this material grew out of a place where capitalism was rampant in the US, and it grew out of a place where this kind of positive thinking, often connected up with Christianity, but I would say Christianity light, was very popular, right? And the business world loves this stuff, right? And anybody who runs a business would love to hire someone who is self-disciplined, right? Has goals to work in a company and do well, right? Behaves themselves, and of course, by the way, is apolitical. You don't want those political types, right? And so this is the kind of, and who comes in to work on time, right? And who's willing to work overtime, is eager, right, and happy, or pretending to be happy. We all have to pretend to be happy at work, right? So all of those things are qualities that fit in well in the workplace, right? And they fit in with workplaces everywhere. So I don't think it's a conspiracy unless capitalism is a conspiracy, which God knows it could be, I suppose. But I think it has. I think it could feel like that. But the problem is, if you go to Delhi, you'll find the same thing. You go to Morocco, you'll find the same thing. You go to the U.S., you find the same thing, and you go to Europe, and you find much the same thing. How many companies bring in these kinds of people to talk to their workers in order to, get them motivated, right? And get them to think more intentionally about being a good worker. Now, if you've been working for a company for a long time and you think you've been mistreated and certainly not paid enough, you hear this stuff and you think, blah, 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 I don't want to hear this, right? But that's me. But for other people, I mean, this sounds like, and I think most businesses that I know, or most companies and corporations, and certainly the university where I am, it's split between those people who will support any idea coming from the administration because positive thinking is positive thinking. We all want to be positive. If you criticize, you're known as one of those, right? No one likes critics. We only like positive thinking, and we only like feeling good about where we are, being happy, or again, pretending to be even if you want to. So I think that the self that this is promoting is really more of a global self, that fits into so many different places. And the language of it is meant to do that because it just neutralizes itself in terms of everything else. It's not concerned with other things. It's not concerned with you being a better moral person. It's concerned with you being a more efficient and more productive and more reliable person. It's business. And it's neoliberalism. And neoliberalism, I would say, if there's a conspiracy, is everywhere too. I guess we could talk to the World Bank about this, or the International Monetary Fund, or both. There are some conspiracies right there, but that's just global economic policy. It's all meant to benefit us. Sorry, I just don't, again, I don't believe that it's conspiratorial, but I think it's allowed to play itself out. Again, there's no country that I know of that even often does ban some books. None of these books would ever be banned because they're so inane to begin with. And everything they're saying is, fits in with what many governments would like their citizens to be like.
Question?
What do you see as a problem or as a negative impact from this phenomena to maybe religious life, quality, or I just wondering if everyone concerned to
Right. No, I understand.
Yeah.
I understand what you mean.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that you understand that this is language that's in the books. I'm not talking about what's in people's heads. I think there's a big difference. When I'm reading these books and I'm seeing the way they're pulling in sacred texts and using them for a purpose that I would say most of those sacred texts aren't used for, right? But let's face it, anybody who's been living in a Muslim majority society for any period of time knows that in the modern period, especially with the creation of the nation state, Islam, the Quran, the Sunnah, Muhammad, they've been instrumentalized over and over and over and over again for a variety of purposes. Yeah. To promote a variety of political economies, right? And to promote a variety of ideas, often whether the citizens like it or not. It's often government top-down. So, and people instrumentalize Islam all the time, too. And people in Christianity instrumentalize Christianity. So, I mean, in part one could say that's what keeps the tradition alive, but part of that instrumentalizing often takes the religion into a different context where it has a very different feel. And I think it has not just a different feel, but it has a different impact when you understand it. Now, here's my thing. It's quite possible that the people who are reading the things that I'm somewhat critical of here, they also have an array of conservative books on their shelves, right? There's no way of telling that. But what I do know is that I think the nature of these books per se has taken over the industry and it's influenced everyone. Right? The nature of the kind of book it is and the reason why these books are successful is because they do not take any kind of direct critical aim at anything sensitive. And they're inherently positive, right? And they're trying to make each and every one of us more successful, more productive, happier, better parents, better husband, better wife, better whatever, right? And who can argue with that, right? So there's nothing wrong with that. But my point is, the discourse and the way that religion is brought in takes what it means to be Muslim and reduces it to something else. It reduces it to a different kind of self. Now that doesn't mean that the person who's reading it feels like their Muslim self has been reduced. Right? That doesn't mean that's the way they feel or that's the way they take it. But I would say this, that over time what this is doing is it's promoting a very highly individualistic notion that is changing the contours of traditional conservative societies. Because when somebody's telling you it's all about you, and it's not about your society, it's all about you, it's not about the ummah, it's all about you, it's not about your family. And by the way, and when the workplace is telling you that too, you owe us your workplace. You owe us. You must do this. That has an impact, and it has an impact not just in traditional conservative societies, it has an impact everywhere. So I don't want to make too bold a statement here saying that Muslims are now walking down the street having read 2 or 3 of these books and now they're different Muslims. Of course not. That's not the way it works. But this discourse, and I would say the backlash, and there is a backlash, I think, with some of these conservative self-help books, that is a sign that people recognize that this stuff has grown in popularity and people are worried about its long-term impact. And people are trying to draw people back to what they think is important about living life in this world, not just to succeed here, but to succeed in the next one. The self-help books are neutral on that too. They don't care about your next one. And they're counting on you being more concerned about this one. And by the way, again, they're not saying that it doesn't matter. If they said that, no one would read them. They're just not saying it.
Next question.
Okay, in my opinion, for Muslim Brotherhood, that you see, I said that the laws of Muslim Brotherhood passed down for millennia. So with their unique arts and cosmologism has some consequences. Still too late to reverse them. So how is your point of view in facing this phenomenon?
So you said the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah, Muslim Brotherhood. Writing in his question.
So you mean their influence in Egypt?
Yeah, in Egypt.
Okay.
I mean, I'm currently studying in Egypt.
Right.
One university is in Egypt, another university, and I see that the Muslim Brotherhood, laws of Muslim Brotherhood passed down for this millennia. So
Right.
how are you facing this phenomenon?
Oh yeah, I certainly wouldn't want to, just because the government now is chasing every Muslim Brotherhood leader, and they're now second, third tier people, and they're trying to either jail them or chase them out of the country. And the only ones who are speaking up now are out of the country. Right? I don't think the Muslim Brotherhood is defunct. Right? They're certainly trying to negotiate something here. And there really haven't been any executions of top-ranked people, even though Morsi passed away. One could say that he was killed by virtue of neglect, but we won't go into that. It just seems right now that Sisi, and I would say the military, because that's who's running the country, is the military, are not in the mood for compromise. And now, by the way, this has a global impact, and now with the support of the Saudis, the support of the Gulf, and the support of Trump, everybody is so anti-Islamist at the moment, right? That there is, it's good global politics, and it might not be the best domestic politics, but it's good enough because Sisi had returned to the authoritarian status quo. And people will not promote the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. That doesn't mean that they don't support some of their ideas. Right? I think that's pretty clear that there's probably still some support. How much? Who knows? But when you win, let's face it, the two parties that came out on top in the first free and fair election in Egypt was the Freedom and Justice Party and the Salafis. They came in second. That's saying something. And which is why it concerned the liberals and it concerned the military and the deep state so much. Now, luckily for them, one could argue, I think Morsi was a little bit ham-handed, a little bit clumsy in the way he handled some things. But I have no doubt that he would have been out within a year or two anyway. They would have found a way to get rid of him. And they were helped along by a lot of secularists who are Muslims, but they tend to want the separation of religion, and they are scared of the Muslim Brotherhood, mainly because they don't know what they're going to do. They've never been in power before, and when they got into power, they started to do stuff that maybe people didn't like. And they're not, I don't think they're as astute and wise as the Muslim Brotherhood in Tunisia, who I think have been much smarter about how to handle politics and how to make Islam adapt and adopt to different ways. So how much grassroots support is still there for the Muslim Brotherhood? I have no clue, and no one's taken a poll, because no one wants to know, right? Certainly the government doesn't want to know, right? They don't want to know that, and they don't care, because they're not letting them back in, right, anytime soon. and they've got the full support. They're getting money from the Saudis, they're getting money from the Gulf. Trump is willing to overlook anything. I mean, this guy doesn't have my president, I'm not supposed to say this, a Fulbrighter, but the guy doesn't have a moral bone in his body, and he doesn't have a policy that he's willing to stick to that it isn't transactional. He's willing to sell U.S. policy decisions. He's doing it now with the Saudis. I mean, with the latest thing he said about, do the Saudis want to retaliate against Iran? If they do, we'll do it, but they're going to have to pay us. I mean, if that's a foreign policy, it's a pretty embarrassing one. This isn't the extreme still. I don't want to get recalled from my Fulbright before. Set it into my partner. So I do think that there's probably a good deal of, and maybe even some sympathy now. And by the way, maybe even some sympathy from some liberals, many of whom who were behind this Arab Spring, but who wound up being jailed afterward. Because when the Sisi cracked down, when the military cracked down, they cracked down on everyone. So it was a brotherhood, and it was even many of the people who were behind the Arab Spring. They didn't want any voices of dissent up there. So they're back to, I'd say they're back to pre-Mubarak days. It's worse than Mubarak.
Okay, you still have 15 minutes. Please. Yeah.
You're studying about the literature about self-development and competence that, and then you show us about a lot of books about self-development, something like that. So I'm curious about how do you see that kind of book? Do you see it based on the years or based on the history, based on the era or something like that? Do you find any differences about the book that has been published in the 19th century or
Right.
the 20th century or something?
Yeah, there are some